I still remember the color of the sky that day. A dull, leaden gray, like cold ash draped across all of Europe. We had been marching for days without rest, mud clinging up to our knees, our cloaks soaked through, boots worn down to bleeding skin. No one spoke. We were just shadows by then, moving on instinct alone. Machines that had run out of fuel, but were still being forced to crawl a few last miles. Then the order came, short and brutal. Surrender. There were no cheers, no tears, only a silence that seemed to snap something deep inside my chest. Everything that had kept us going through all those years, honor, loyalty, brotherhood, the fiery slogans hammered into our skulls, crumbled in that instant like a wall eaten through by rot. I looked around. Some of the boys were so young their faces were still soft with youth, now streaked with mud, hands trembling as they clutched rifles that no longer mattered. Others were older, eyes hollowed out like burnt craters, heavy with all they had seen. In Stalingrad, in Normandy, in the cities of our homeland that now lay shattered and smoking. We were no longer soldiers, just survivors of a firestorm that had left nothing standing. The Allied trucks arrived with their metal doors screeching open, and we were herded aboard without a word. As the trains carried us westward, rumors passed between us like glowing embers in the dark. England, maybe France, some prison camp where we would rot away, breaking rocks until our backs gave out. We all expected that. But then the news came like a lightning strike. Not Europe. We were being sent to America. America, a name I had only ever seen on propaganda leaflets from the ministry. In my mind, it was a land of ruthless capitalists who bled their workers dry, a place of violence and slums where enemies were tortured and shot without trial. We whispered about execution camps, about forced labor mines, about slow deaths far from home. And somehow, what terrified me most wasn't dying. It was not knowing what waited across the ocean. As the train wheels screeched along the tracks and the damp air clung to my skin like cold sweat, I sat gripping the edge of my coat, trying to picture what America might look like. But the harder I tried, the blurrier it became. Because I had never seen it, and I had never believed I would live long enough to. I didn't know it then, but that journey would not lead me to death. It would lead me into a world so foreign that even its smallest things would shatter everything I thought I knew. I had never thought I would see the ocean, and certainly not as a defeated man, hands bound behind my back. They crammed us into the belly of the ship like livestock, hundreds of us pressed together in the dim cargo hold. The steel ceiling dripped with salt water, the floor slick with grease and sweat. Waves slammed against the hull in steady blows, and the air turned heavy and sour, soaked with oil, metal, and fear. At night, the sound of the man breathing beside me blended with the frantic beating of my own heart. I used to fear dying under artillery fire. Now I feared vanishing into the Atlantic, slipping under the waves nameless and unseen. And yet, what unsettled me most wasn't down there in the dark. It was up on deck, the Americans. They didn't look at us with hatred. They didn't snarl or spit or shout. They strolled about with their rifles slung loosely, chatting, laughing, sometimes offering each other cigarettes as if on holiday. I couldn't understand it. How could they be so at ease, standing among their enemies? Even the food felt wrong, not the rock-hard biscuits or scorched black ersatz coffee we were used to, but soft bread, even butter. Coffee that smelled warm and rich, poured into thick metal mugs as if for men, not captives. I chewed slowly, half expecting it to disappear, half expecting someone to slap it out of my hand and laugh. We were forbidden to speak to the guards, but our eyes still met sometimes. They were young, some only a few years older than me, yet they carried themselves with a strange kind of weightless confidence. They were not gaunt, they were not afraid. They did not look like the monsters our leaflets had promised. They were just young men, and none of them seemed to doubt they would make it home. That realization unsettled me more than their rifles, because for the first time I felt a new kind of fear, not of dying, but of the possibility that everything I had believed might be wrong. One afternoon, I climbed up on the deck just to breathe. The sea wind cut sharp and cold across my face. Then someone shouted, and the guards around me cheered. I followed their gaze, and far on the horizon, through a smear of fog, I saw it. America. Not rubble, not silence, but cranes like steel spines clawing at the sky, factories exhaling neat white smoke, and cargo ships slicing across the harbor like silver blades. The city didn't wear scars. It pulsed with life. It roared like something invincible. I stood there, gripping the cold railing, unsure if I was shivering from the wind or from the feeling that I was about to step into another world entirely. We docked on a gray morning, but America didn't need sunlight to glow. Even before I saw it, I heard it, the wail of ship horns, the clang of metal on metal, the rumble of trucks down on the docks. And then, through the thinning fog, the city emerged. I had thought every place on earth must look like Germany did by then, ashen, hollowed out, gnawed to the bone. But here, nothing was broken. Towering cranes stood like the steel spines of some massive beast. Conveyors rattled without pause, and cargo ships glided in and out like silver arrows slicing through dark water. Everything I saw was too much, too new, too alive. We were lined up and marched off the ship under the eyes of the American MPs. No one pointed guns at us, but their discipline was so sharp they didn't need to. I walked past mountains of cargo stacked higher than a man, heard music playing faintly from a radio somewhere, heard dock workers laughing as if there wasn't a war raging anywhere in the world. They herded us onto trains again, military boxcars this time. Locked doors, but open windows, and through those narrow panes, America began to slide past like an impossible dream. Tidy towns laid out like model villages, red-roofed houses, white mailboxes, yards trimmed as smooth as velvet. Billboards loomed over the highways, splashed with colors and smiling women selling brands I'd never heard of. Children sat on park benches licking ice cream, chasing each other around sparkling fountains under a flawless sky. I pressed my face to the glass. We, the ones who had crawled out of cellars black with soot, from streets lined with tank husks and houses burned down to skeletons, were now gliding through a world that seemed untouched by the idea of ruin. The man next to me whispered hoarsely, "Looks like a movie." I didn't answer, because right then I realized what frightened me most was no longer dying, but the terrifying chance that everything we'd been told about our enemy had been a lie. The train screeched to a stop after days of travel. The doors slid open, and we were herded out into a landscape so flat and calm it felt unreal. No craters, no smoke, no ruins. Just long rows of trees and dirt roads drawn with ruler-straight precision. I had imagined something brutal, stone fortresses or frozen labor camps where men collapsed under whips. Instead, what stood before me stopped me cold. A camp, but neat, almost pleasant. Barbed wire fences circled the perimeter, and watchtowers stood tall at each corner, but inside were long, orderly wooden barracks, each with fresh shingles and clean windows that caught the sunlight. We were lined up and processed. Each man handed a mattress, a wool blanket, a bed of his own, not the damp straw and lice-infested corners we had pictured. On the wooden shelves sat metal cups, bars of soap, clean towels, toothbrushes. I looked around. No one spoke. We didn't know how to react to being treated, like human beings. That night, they led us to the mess hall. I froze when I saw the trays. Mashed potatoes, meat stew, bright green vegetables, soft white bread still warm, and rich-smelling coffee that rose in curls of steam. It wasn't anything luxurious, but to men who had lived on watery soup, moldy black bread, and fake coffee made from roasted beet skins, it was a royal feast. I chewed slowly, not to savor it, but because each bite carried guilt like lead. In my mind, I saw my mother, thin as a shadow, hunched over a cold hearth, my younger siblings picking through rubble for scraps of bread. And here I was, the son who left to conquer the world, eating like a king in the hands of our enemy. I glanced toward the American guards at the doors, and confusion twisted deeper. They weren't harsh. They didn't bark orders or strut about to show dominance like our German officers had. They just stood there, calm. Some laughed softly. Some leaned against the wall reading newspapers. A few sipped coffee as if nothing in this world could trouble them. And that was when I felt it. Something inside me shifting off its axis. Not something wrong with them. Something wrong with me. With everything I had been taught. About decadent America. About cruel, collapsing America. About America starving on its own streets. Those words now felt like wet ashes, cold, sour, and unable to burn. That night, I lay awake on a clean mattress, staring at the fresh pine boards above me, while from the guardhouse outside came the soft hum of laughter. It kept me awake for hours. Not because I envied it, but because I couldn't understand how they could be so unafraid while the world was on fire. And I didn't know then that starting the very next morning, the cigarettes in their hands would begin to break down the last walls still standing inside my mind. I don't remember the exact day I first saw him, only the sharp afternoon light slicing through the barbed wire, spilling golden strips across the gray dirt. A young American soldier leaned against the barrack wall. He tapped a cigarette from his pack, struck a match on his boot heel, and lit it with a casual flick of his wrist. The scene was so ordinary, and yet I couldn't look away. He smoked slowly, like there was nothing else in the world he needed to do. Then halfway through, he flicked the still-burning cigarette to the ground and walked off. I froze. It wasn't that I'd never seen anyone smoke. It was that I had never seen anyone throw away half a cigarette. Back in Germany, we had scraped tobacco from stubs, rolled it in scraps of newspaper, and passed it around like treasure. Sometimes one half-burned cigarette would go through 5 pairs of desperate fingers. We had sucked the smoke in like drowning men gasping for air. Here, they tossed it away like pebbles, and once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Every morning, trucks rumbled through the gates unloading massive brown crates stamped with red logos. Lucky Strike, Camel, Chesterfield. They piled up in the storerooms like bricks. Cigarettes were passed out with rations, with coffee, with bread, as if they could never run out. At first, we suspected a trick, some clever American ploy to soften us before interrogation. But then, a day passed. Then another. Then a week, and the cigarettes just kept coming, like an endless river of smoke. They seeped into everything. After work, the guards would toss down a few packs for us to scramble over, grinning at the spectacle. Within days, cigarettes had become the camp's currency. 1 cigarette for a slice of bread, 5 for someone to wash your clothes, a whole pack for a warm blanket in winter. I didn't even notice when I became addicted. Not just to the smoke, but to the feeling of holding something that seemed inexhaustible. Lighting one after a long day gave me a strange sense of dignity, as if I was reclaiming a sliver of the man I used to be. In the curling haze above our bunks, conversations grew easier, laughter came more often, and for a few fleeting minutes, I felt like more than a number behind barbed wire. But what truly unsettled me wasn't that we were smoking. It was how they gave them away. The Americans smoked constantly, flicking ash, tossing half-burned stubs, offering each other cigarettes like they were nothing. No hoarding, no bargaining, just effortless abundance. They smoked while reading newspapers, while playing cards, while standing guard, as if the world had never taught them fear or scarcity. And in every lazy flick of their fingers, I saw something more powerful than any weapon. A wealth so deep that luxury had become routine. I had been taught that America was decaying, corrupt, starving on its own streets. But here I was, drowning in a sea of cigarettes, and for the first time I began to doubt everything I had been told. Because if a nation could hand out this much luxury, even to its enemies, then maybe we had never truly understood its strength at all. I remember the first time I saw it as clearly as a gunshot. A slim, silver-wrapped strip glinting like treasure as an American soldier pulled it from his pocket. I thought it was medicine, or maybe some kind of pill. But he simply peeled off the foil, popped it into his mouth, and started chewing. Chewing while walking, chewing while talking, chewing like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared long enough that he noticed. He smiled and offered me one. I hesitated. I had learned to be suspicious of kindness. It was often just humiliation wearing a smile. But curiosity won. I took it. The flavor hit like a spark. Sweet, sharp, cool as mint, sliding across my tongue, sticking to my teeth. I chewed, waiting for it to dissolve like candy. It didn't. I chewed longer. It still didn't. I stopped, thinking I had done something wrong. The soldier chuckled and motioned for me to keep going. So I did. 5 minutes, 10, 20. It only softened, faded in taste, but stayed. I was stunned. In my world, food was to be swallowed, to survive, to kill hunger, to keep life clinging to the bones. This was just for fun. Within days, gum began flooding the camp like the cigarettes had. Brightly colored sticks wrapped in shiny paper, with grinning women printed on the labels, names I had never seen. Wrigley's, Doublemint, Juicy Fruit. They appeared in the canteen, sold for the wages we earned from work details, and we bought them like fragments of magic. Some men chewed theirs and carefully wrapped the gum back up afterward, saving it like a holy relic. Some kept the wrappers flattened under their pillows. Some learned to blow bubbles, laughing like children each time one popped and stuck to their faces. I didn't laugh. I couldn't, because every chew reminded me of the children back home. Children clawing through rubble for crusts of bread. While I, a defeated prisoner, was chewing something that wasn't food, that served no purpose except to kill time. Guilt pressed into my jaw with every bite. And with it came another fear, sharper than bullets. America was rich enough to build an entire industry just to make something you didn't even swallow. They could feed an army, ship cigarettes into every corner of every camp, and stuff chewing gum into the pockets of their enemies, while my mother was likely cutting one potato into 3. This was no longer a war. It was a comparison between a world of excess and a world already hollowed out. And ours had lost long before the shooting stopped. The letters began to arrive, thin and frail, stacked in neat piles on the duty table. They called our names one by one, and we stepped forward like schoolboys receiving prizes, except these prizes usually left men silent. I held my first letter with trembling hands. The paper was so thin it was almost transparent. The handwriting rushed and fading, blurred in places as if touched by water. It smelled faintly of smoke. "We're managing," my mother wrote. "It's cold, but we're enduring. Your younger siblings are back in school. Sometimes there is bread." I read each word like chewing cold ashes. She didn't need to describe the house for me to see it. A broken roof, a dead hearth, children picking through rubble for potato peels. And here I was, chewing gum and exhaling loops of cigarette smoke. I wrote back, but I couldn't tell the truth. I couldn't tell her that I ate hot meat stew every day, that I slept on clean mattresses, that I chewed brightly colored gum like the children in picture books. All I wrote was, "I'm alive. Don't worry." Some of the others were more honest. They wrote about being treated well, about the food, the coffee, the cigarettes. I envied their courage and feared it, because if their families knew, what would they think? If my mother knew, What would she think of the son who lived better in the enemy's hands than she did in her own home? That guilt clung to me even when the day of release finally came. We were given back our few belongings, a change of clothes, some wages, old letters, and small mementos, an American lighter, an empty cigarette pack, a flattened gum wrapper. We lined up and boarded ships again, just like the day we came. But this time there was no trembling, only silence. No one spoke loudly, no one laughed when we stepped back onto German soil. The familiar smell no longer comforted me. The cities were bones, streets pocked with craters, windows boarded with rotting wood, faces hollowed out by hunger staring at us like ghosts. I couldn't tell them about America, couldn't tell them about the rivers of cigarettes, the endless gum, the way I had felt human again. We all stayed silent, as if we understood the same truth. If we spoke, no one would believe us, and if they did, they would hate us. Years later, when Germany had risen from its ruins, I still chewed gum, slowly, rhythmically, like the ticking of a clock. My son once asked, "Where did you pick up that habit, Papa?" I just smiled and said, "From a very far-away place. A place that didn't just defeat us with bombs, but with the smallest things. Because I know now, what defeated us wasn't their cannons, but the power of a nation so wealthy it could afford to let its enemies live better than their own families." And even now, when I light a cigarette, I remember the first time I watched an American soldier flick half of his still-burning smoke away, and realized I was looking at a future my country would need decades to catch.